Welcome to the Means Test. This training will provide you an overview of the Legal Aid New South Wales Means Test. The Means Test is one of 4 eligibility tests that we use when determining an application for legal aid. This training module will show you where to find the detail on the Means Test on Policy Online. It will provide an overview of the structure of the Means Test and whose means are considered. It will then explain what Legal Aid New South Wales requires in order to verify an applicant's means. Finally, it will go through a case study. There are 4 eligibility tests for legal aid. They are the jurisdiction test, whether legal aid is available for that kind of matter, the merit test, the means test, and the availability of funds test. Not all tests are applied to all matters. For example, the merit test is not applied to criminal matters in the first instance where a term of imprisonment is a possible outcome. The details of eligibility criteria and which tests apply are found on Policy Online. Our policies are published on Policy Online on the Legal Aid New South Wales website. You can find Policy Online in the For Lawyers drop-down menu. This will take you to the list of policies that relate to grants of legal aid. The means test is at Chapter 7. Chapter 7 contains the details of the means test and its application. The means test has 3 limbs: the income test, the assets test, and the ability to pay legal costs test. It considers the income and assets of the applicant for legal aid and any financially associated person. The means test is used to determine not only eligibility for a grant of legal aid, but also to calculate the financial contribution the client is expected to make towards their legal costs. A financially associated person is someone who could reasonably be expected to contribute to the applicant's legal costs and is therefore included in the assessment of the applicant's means in accordance with the Legal Aid New South Wales means test. Someone who might reasonably be expected to contribute to the legal costs is, for example, a spouse or the parent of a dependent child. The financially associated person test is based on household types. There are 3 main household types: couple family households, one parent family households, and other households. There can be multiple household types living under the same roof. For example, we consider adult children living at home to be independent for the purposes of our means test. If a 30-year-old male applies for legal aid and lives with his parents in the family home, we would consider there to be 2 households living under the same roof. The son is a single person household, and the parents are a couple family household. The parent's income and assets would not be considered when determining the 30-year-old's application for legal aid. Another scenario could be the 30-year-old man lives in a share house with 2 other people. It is not reasonable to expect a housemate to contribute to your legal expenses, and we would consider there to be 3 single people living under the same roof for the purposes of the means test. The housemate's income and assets would not be included. But if he lives with a partner, he would be part of a couple family household. We assume a relationship of financial association, and his partner's income and assets would be included in the assessment of his means. Here we have a diagram that shows the different household types and financially associated persons. This is available to download on our website. Go to the For Lawyers drop-down menu and select Resources and Tools. On this page, there is a link to Eligibility Policy Resources. The first limb of the means test is the income test. We take the gross assessable income minus excluded income. We look at income from all sources, including pensions and benefits, wages and salaries, board or rent received, spousal maintenance and child support, superannuation payments, workers' compensation and insurance payments, and all periodic payments, including from investments. We exclude income from family tax benefit A and B, carer allowance, rent assistance, and NDIS amounts. Once you have the gross assessable income, you apply the allowable deductions. This table shows the maximum weekly amounts that can be deducted. We allow up to $455 per week for housing costs. This is not a flat rate. If an applicant lives in Sydney and pays $350 per week in rent, we will deduct $350 for housing costs from their weekly income. If they pay $500 per week in rent, we will deduct $455, the maximum amount. If they have a financially associated person, we will deduct $200. Keep in mind, though, the financially associated person's income and assets will also be included in the assessment, but does not receive the benefit of deductions received. The applicant will satisfy the income component of the means test if their income, after deductions, is $400 per week or less. If their income exceeds $400, legal aid will only be granted in exceptional circumstances. Applicants who receive a maximum Centrelink income support payment will automatically satisfy the income component of the eligibility test. Eligible applicants must pay an income contribution in all matters unless it's an exempt matter. This is generally $75. The second limb of the means test is the assets test. Here we consider all assets less excluded assets. This includes land, cash, shares, and all other investments. This table shows the assets we exclude so long as the value does not exceed the maximum limit. Where an applicant owns the home they live in, we allow a home equity deduction of up to $521,000. In most cases, they will be required to sign a charge agreement to secure the cost of proceedings against the property. Legal Aid New South Wales will only enforce the charge if the property is sold or transferred. There are some instances where we treat lump sum payments as income, such as some workers' compensation or insurance payouts. The details of this policy can be found on Policy Online in Means Test, Chapter 7.7, Assets Test. The allowable assets for a single applicant is $2,800. For an applicant with a financially associated person or dependents, the allowable amount is $4,800. There is not an upper ceiling on assets like the $400 limit in the income test. Instead, the assets are used to calculate the asset based contribution to legal costs. Where the contribution exceeds the cost of proceedings, the applicant will not be eligible for legal aid. The third limb of the means test is the ability to pay test. Here, we take a broad view of the applicant's financial situation and consider whether they have the ability to pay for their own legal costs privately. Firstly, we consider the applicant's assets. We look at what general assets they have and also the ability to borrow against these assets, such as equity in the home or business. Second, we consider the applicant's lifestyle. We do this by looking at the applicant's activities and interests and their general expenditure. Aid will be refused where Legal Aid New South Wales considers that the applicant can afford to pay their legal costs. Where an applicant does not satisfy the means test, there are a limited number of discretions that may be available. Where an older person has equity in the home that exceeds the allowable amount, there is a discretion to grant legal aid on the condition that the cost of proceedings is secured by a charge over the property. Legal Aid New South Wales will only enforce the charge if the property is sold or transferred. There is a discretion to grant aid where an applicant exceeds the assets test because of stimulus payments associated with COVID-19 or where their income exceeds the $400 limit by less than 10%. There is an additional discretion to grant aid in exceptional circumstances. Discretions can only be exercised by authorised persons under the Legal Aid New South Wales delegation instrument. When considering exceptional circumstances, the following factors are taken into account: the likely cost of the proceedings, the type of proceedings, the overall financial position of the applicant, and whether the applicant would suffer undue financial hardship if legal aid was refused. And where the applicant is outside the means test because the assets contribution exceeds the allowable amount for the type of matter, whether there is sufficient time for the applicant to raise the funds necessary to pay for legal assistance, and whether the applicant could reasonably be expected to borrow against those assets. If you have a client who does not meet the means test, but there are exceptional circumstances, you should prepare a submission addressing this criteria for Legal Aid New South Wales to consider. It is a condition of a grant of legal aid that an applicant's means are verified. Aid will be refused if means are not verified. The solicitor is required to certify that they have received and cited the required documentation. If an applicant and any financially associated person receives a Centrelink income support payment at the maximum rate and discloses that they have less than $1,500 in the bank, then no further verification of means is required. To confirm the Centrelink payment rate, they can sign the Centrelink consent on the application form or provide Centrelink income statements. For all other applicants, more documentation is required depending on the means they disclose. This may include 3 months bank statements, recent pay slips, or a letter from the applicant's employer, tax returns, or a balance sheet and profit and loss statement. John has applied for a grant of legal aid for his criminal matter. He lives with his wife Paula and their 3 children. They rent a 3-bedroom house in Lidcombe, Sydney. John works full-time as a teacher. Paula works part-time at a medical centre. They own a Toyota Camry valued at $18,000 and have $8,000 cash savings in the bank. John and Paula have a combined income of $115,000 per year. Their only assets are the 2013 Toyota Camry, worth $18,000, and savings of around $8,000. Once the deductions are accounted for, John satisfies the means test and he may be eligible for a grant of legal aid. If so, he would be required to pay an initial contribution of $3,675.